If one's practice is genuine, it's never just inner work. We're interacting. We live in an interconnected universe. And so, there's this saying going around, which I think is true, that action absorbs anxiety.
Wow.
Like if you're feeling really anxious, you're feeling really uptight, and who isn't in a way, take action. But action might not mean marching, or it may not mean signing a petition or vocalizing something. It may mean helping your neighbor. It may mean something like that. And there is something that is often missing, though. I don't see it as this particular dichotomy. What I've seen for years is that if one is practicing sincerely, there are genuine transformations that take place on a human-to-human level.
Hello and welcome to the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast with David Nichtern on the Be Here Now network. I'm your host and MC, Brett Kane, and on behalf of all of us over here at Be Here Now and Dharma Moon, we sincerely hope this podcast finds you well and in good spirits. And we're happy that you're with us. Here at the CSM podcast, our guide, David Nichtern, explores how to lead an integrated life with our spiritual practice, creative expression, and right livelihood, all operating in harmony. He often does this with the help of some of the top teachers, entrepreneurs, and creatives who have really mastered this Herculean effort. And this episode is no different, as he's going to be joined by one of the most influential people in the realm of Western Dharma, Sharon Salzberg. The themes for this episode orbit around the perennially important topic of socially engaged Buddhism. Essentially, how can the Buddha's Dharma help us respond accordingly to a world which is hurting on so many fronts? It's a tall order for many of us, but luckily we have some incredible teachers such as David and Sharon to walk beside us. For those of you who are not familiar with Sharon Salzberg, allow me the honor to bring you up to speed. She's the co-founder of the hugely influential Insight Meditation Society, along with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein. She's largely considered one of the premier figures in helping establish authentic Buddhist practice here in the West, with her heartfelt emphasis being on Vipassana and Metta, or loving kindness practices. She also just happens to be a New York Times bestselling author, having written 13 books over her 5-decade career. Lastly, she's the host of the popular podcast, The Metta Hour, which can also be found on the Be Here Now network. So if you'd like to stay connected with Sharon, head on over to SharonSalzberg.com, where you can scoop up some of her books, tune into her podcast, or sign up for one of her upcoming events. Namely, she has a 5-unit course in collaboration with Tricycle on the Buddhist personality types that begins on July 7th, so check the link down below in the description. Beyond that, we encourage everyone to head on over to dharmamoon.com, where we always have an incredible series of offerings available for you to deepen your practice in community. It's not too late to sign up for this upcoming mindfulness meditation teacher training program, which begins on June 13th. If you're unsure about diving in, you're also welcome to come check out the introduction weekend, which covers the basics of mindfulness and what it means to walk the path of meditation. The links to both of those things will be in the description. Last, but certainly not least, we want to extend a very heartfelt thank you to the folks over at the Be Here Now network for helping us get this show to the masses. They have an incredible family of podcasts with some of the greatest minds in the world of spirituality. We encourage you to deepen your practice with them by heading on over to the BeHereNowNetwork.com and seeing what they have to offer. I'm sure you'll find something that resonates with you. So that's going to be it for the preamble. Without further ado, it is my utmost honor to welcome you to the 56th episode of the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast with David Nichtern and very, very special guest, Sharon Salzberg. Thank you and enjoy.
Ladies, gentlemen, and members of the Sangha of all ilks, all locations, all times, all places, this is a great pleasure for me to welcome to the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast, old friend Sharon Salzberg. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you. It's great to be with you.
I know it's been too long, but just to share, Sharon and I have shared rides to Kripalu where we've gone into deep Dharma dives. We've shared this wonderful friendship with Krishna Das. we've shared. Sharon actually conducted the wedding of my son Ethan. So we've had quite a nice run of heartfelt and loving and intelligent communication over the years. And so it's a great pleasure to have you jump in here with us. So first of all, you look great.
Thank
and
you.
we chatted a little, so I take it things are well and in your world.
Yeah.
Okay.
Things are good. Things are good.
That makes me happy to hear. And also, Sharon is my guru. She's one of my gurus. And whenever I teach loving kindness, I say, this is my guru for this is Sharon Salzberg, because every word I have to say about it really comes from you and your take on it and your ability to articulate the nuance of that practice, which has become part of the Dharma Moon platform. It's a course that we do. So, apart from that, I guess spontaneously, I just want to say that Sharon, for me, is always able to articulate what I'm thinking about with clarity, and kind of precision. And she's plenty heartfelt, but she also has a kind of Vajra mind that we talk about in Buddhism, a clarity of being able to articulate different Dharma points. So I had an idea, Sharon, for something for us to look into together, and then we can ramble a little bit. But lately, a lot of particularly the younger Sangha members, are talking intensively about the role of the Buddhist teachings and practices in relation to society, in particular, social, economic, political forum, and calling that loosely engaged Buddhism, for lack of there may be a better word for it and a more contemporary word for it, as opposed to the tradition of pulling back from society, which you could argue was the Buddha's kind of take, pull back, and develop a contemplative practice that is an internal practice or working within the Sangha only. So I'm just wondering if you've bumped into that dichotomy lately, how you're doing with it, if you have a perspective on it.
I certainly have bumped into it. I think I see things from a somewhat different angle, perhaps less of a dichotomy, I mean, here was the Buddha, even in a simple frame, where when he was working so largely within monastic Sangha of monks and nuns, and he made rules like they're not allowed to hoard food. They're not allowed to keep food overnight. Every single day they had to go out amongst the people, right? Or they wouldn't eat. And they couldn't practice. They certainly couldn't survive. And so there was a kind of mutuality in the dynamic, because what they owed the people in turn was their virtue and their commitment and their not exploiting them in any way, and I just found that really fascinating, even just those simple interactions. And I understand the need. I mean, there's so much suffering and so much difficulty. I understand the need to forcefully engage, but I also think that takes so many different forms. Like bell hooks was a friend of mine, for example. And when I was working on Real Change, this book, which was basically about activists and people incorporating the principles of practice, whether they were formal meditators or not. Some of them were, some of them weren't. But those kind of principles like self-respect and patience and things like that in their manifestation. And I was talking to Belle, and Belle said something like, she was very, very, very precise with language. The only people I know more precise were like Buddhist scholars who were like so picky, and you think, really, But she was like that. She said, I don't really like the term social action, because for some people it might only imply marching and protesting. She said, what about art? And that became a really important teaching for me in interviewing people. I was starting to interview playwrights and, people who were presenting a vision of possibility to society, breaking down barriers in those ways. And so, and also just on the personal level, if one's practice is genuine, is never just inner work. We're interacting. We live in an interconnected universe. And so, there's this saying going around, which I think is true, that action absorbs anxiety.
Wow.
Like if you're feeling really anxious, you're feeling really uptight, and who isn't, in a way, take action. But action might not mean marching, or it may not mean signing a petition or vocalizing something. It may mean helping your neighbor. It may mean something like that. And there is something that is often missing, though. I don't see it as this particular dichotomy. What I've seen for years is that if one is practicing sincerely, there are genuine transformations that take place on a human-to-human level. So the common thing people would say to me would be something like, I was doing loving kindness practice, and I went out for a walk, and somebody on the street came up and asked me for $1. And I gave them $1 because that's always been my habit. But this is the first time I ever looked them in the eye and realized this was a human being. I mean, I've seen that transformation a billion times, but what doesn't necessarily follow is a kind of systems analysis, like why there's so many homeless people on the street.
Right.
What's the housing policy of this town?
Yeah.
What's the mortgage policy of these banks, whatever it might be. And I think there are some schools, maybe the Mahayana more than the Theravada, which was really my root tradition, that emphasize kind of systems thinking. Is that right? But
that's a pertinent question, because it definitely emphasizes the interbeing, interactivity. But the systems piece is the one I was, sort of nudging us towards, because that's where the Buddhist practitioner could say, I don't have access to that. I'm not part of that machinery. I'm really doing a different part of what the social fabric is requiring here. But I know people like are saying you have to intentionally be involved with the systemic part of what's been going on. Otherwise, there's an avoidant quality to it.
Well, that's a judgment, I don't know.
It is. And, and people who have strong judgments don't always see them as such, right?
Yeah. But I think, there's something, I think it's not necessarily inherent in a Dharma training, but it is its own kind of education to think in those terms. And the link to the Dharma training is looking for causes and conditions, right? And realizing that if you are working intentionally to solve a problem or find a resolution to something, look deeper. Like the Thai activist Sulak Shivaraksha came to visit us in Barrie once at the Insight Meditation Society, and he was speaking to this group of us, and he said something like, if you want to solve the problem of child trafficking in Thailand, you have to look at agricultural policy. He said, why are those farmers starving? Why are they selling their children? So it was like, look deeper for causes and conditions. And I think however your manifestation is going to look, whether you're actively seeking policy change or you're trying to highlight an issue, or you're acknowledging these are people too, whatever level it is, we have to think to look deeper into problems. Otherwise, it's just contentious, right?
Yeah.
It's just views arguing with one another. But it always behooves us to look deeper. If you're another experience I had, this is all in Real Change, that book. When I was at some conference kind of about love and activism, and somebody was saying that they taught literacy in this prison in Texas, which I'm sure is not an easy thing to do, and a really fabulous, effort, and could change lives. And somebody stood up and said, do you address the racism in that system, that therefore send so many people, perhaps needlessly, to prison? And the answer was no, of course. That wasn't their perspective, but it was another reminder to me to let's look deeper,
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to be active in if you're trying to change a situation, cultivate a view that can look at causes and conditions.
As you're saying that, Sharon, this thoughts crossing the wilderness of one's mind, little on some on horseback, some on foot, is these cultures from whence the Buddhist tradition emanates were not actually democratic.
Yeah, they're not.
I mean, I'm not sure who's really talked about this directly, but bringing Buddhist tradition into a democratic culture, what's left of it, is intriguing in that there's a basic worldview that is structured differently, and that is another great topic of the kind of hierarchical, vertical versus horizontal forms of creating structure and stuff like that. So the Buddhist system, even Theravada, the teacher is very important, right? You venerate the teacher, right?
The teacher is known as a spiritual friend, so it's not quite the same relationship,
right.
But it's certainly respectful.
Right. Yeah. Do you find in people these days that, like in the environments that we're circulating in and teaching, are more oriented towards having a more democratic, quote unquote, relationship with the teacher and with the studies?
Yeah, I mean, I think in different degrees, sometimes a problematic degree, but you made me think of something else, right out of the Buddhist teaching. Despite the structure, I think the kind of moral code was still based on responsiveness and mutuality and empathy and things that are different. There's some story right out of the Theravada teachings about the Buddha counseling a king to be, I think it was just and generous. And the king remembered to be just, but forgot to be generous. And so people started stealing because they were hungry. And then he instituted these punishments for the theft. And the Buddha said something like, look deeper. If you'd remembered to be generous and you were feeding the people, which is your responsibility as king, they wouldn't have to steal. It's not a question of instituting punishments. It's a question of being not only just, but generous, So it's right in there, even though, of course, the reputation of the teachings of the Buddha is kind of archaic and, feudal and
patriarchal, right?
What's that?
Patriarchal as well,
and
no?
Patriarchal.
That's I love watching. I won't mention any names, but some of the Tibetan teachers sort of dancing around that issue in terms of why. Since one of them was asked, so why aren't there women tulkus, incarnations? And it's amazingly simple answer. Actually, it's because the culture didn't support it. But nobody is willing to just kind of put it out that is, whether you judge it one way or the other, it's not going to fly today. It's just it's going to shift and change in different culture. So that brings me to a kind of a bridge over something we were chatting about earlier, which is, and I think that you've given us the title for this episode, which is "Look Deeper."
Look deeper.
It seems to me that might even be a good. Not that I'm nudging you, but a good title for something or other, or something like a book. Look deeper. It's good. Good little meme. So as we're looking deeper, what I feel is that, and looking at cause and effect, the causes of what we're experiencing systemically really do make sense against the Buddhist backdrop of greed, delusion, self-cherishing, all those things are what's actually causing the problem that we're having. It's more source code problem than any system piece of it.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
you're going to teach a program, an online program?
Yeah, it's an online program for Tricycle Magazine.
For Tricycle Magazine. So we'll have in the show notes, everybody will have a link to that, and hopefully you can check that out with some fundamental sort of schema of how your tradition looks at kind of neurosis, really, in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Could you say a little bit about the workshop and what you're talking about there?
Well, the 3 root problems are, grasping, aversion, anger, which is anger and fear, and delusion. And I actually sometimes conceptualize these 3 as misplaced faith. That with greed or grasping, we hope against all odds, that this thing will last, this won't change, this will bring me final perfect happiness. And with
misplaced
anger,
faith. Holy faith, Hannah. Yeah. That's a Sharon, everybody. Right there. That's a Sharon. Misplaced faith.
Yeah, well, don't you think? Don't you agree?
No, it's really right on the dot. So you believe these things are going to bring satisfaction, but they're not once you check it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so with anger or aversion, we can push away successfully. We can seize control. We can make it go away, And then with delusion, which has different meanings, but in this context, is kind of being half asleep or numbed out. We sort of have the belief that it'll go away if I just, take a nap or, don't pay attention at all if I just am spaced out. And so we all, of course, have all 3 tendencies. They also have a purified form, by the way, which we can get into in a minute. But for some people, it's almost like a personality cluster around one or another. Well, we all have all 3. Sometimes one is kind of predominant in one's personality. And I, for example, am very much a deluded type. So the way I sometimes define
but with a very sharp mind.
Well, thank you very much.
That's interesting.
That's
right? Those
people often say, I hear you're a delusional type. And I say, no, it's not delusional. It's deluded, And it's stupid. But I'm more spaced out, the description is like the person who walk into, well, let's start with the grasping type because it highlights the deluded type in the end. Grasping. Okay, so the grasping or greedy type is the kind of person. It doesn't mean you're a greedy person.
Right.
It means you have certain tendencies of perception. So they're defined or described as the kind of person who'll walk into a room and see what's beautiful. Like that's a beautiful tanka. That's actually my favorite depiction of the Buddha right behind your head. And maybe, and this is not true, but maybe your plant is kind of scaly and weird looking, but I don't know. I don't want to look at that. I want to look at the beautiful.
Well, this is the protector principle, and this is the the deity.
And so I sometimes describe that type as the kind of person who, in a meeting, a problem is presented, and they'll say, "It'll all work out." And you think, how's it going to work out? So Joseph Goldstein, my colleague, is very much that type.
So we would call that Padma in the Buddha families.
Okay, yeah.
And a little tinge of the Buddha energy too. This is very similar to the 5 wisdom energies. It's cool.
And I always say the annoying thing about Joseph is that he's always right. It does work out, but you're like, what? And the aversive type is the kind of person who'll walk into the room and see what's wrong. Like, look at that hole in the carpet, and they will not notice the beautiful tanka and the wonderful plant and all that. And sometimes we rely on that person to be like the truth teller, everyone else is carefully looking at anything other than the carpet. And they're saying, look at that carpet. But there's a personal toll, right? When you overlook that which is good and beautiful, and you're kind of consumed with what's wrong. And they're the kind of person who, in a meeting, a possibility is presented, and they'll think it's not going to work. And you think, why not?
Yeah,
let's give it a moment,
The
And the
temperature
diluted
goes down
type,
30 degrees in the room. The temperature goes down. It drops 30
that's
degrees
right.
in an
That's
instant.
right.
Yeah.
And the diluted type, which is very much my type, is like, don't notice much until someone points out, hey, look at the Tonka. And you go, oh, yeah, Tonka. Isn't that nice? And I sort of, like my classic story about being a diluted type is I was here in Barrie. I drove into Cambridge one night to teach. I came back, parked the car outside my house, went to bed, got up in the morning to walk over to the retreat center, which is right next door through the woods, to teach. And I noticed my car was gone. So I walked into the center, I walked into the staff dining room, and I ran into the person who, if anybody had taken the car, like to put in gas or something like that, it would have been him. Mm. So I said, have you seen my car? And he said, your car? No. And I said, well, it's gone. He said, it's gone. And I said, yeah, I just walked right by and it's gone. And then he said, are you sure? So that was the killer moment, because then I thought, am I sure? Did I really not see it? And there's a whole story about what happened to the car, but that's the incredible vulnerability of being lost in delusion. You're counting on other people to define reality for you.
That's the Buddha family of the five. Yeah, it's kind of spacious and vast and expansive and spaced out at the other side of the spectrum.
That's right. One Tibetan teacher gave me a name when I took Bodhisattva vows. I don't actually know the Tibetan name, but I asked somebody, what does it mean? And they said it means space queen or something like that.
Well, it probably means queen of space. It's not space queen, but it's usually those names are more positive in their how they come at it. Yeah. So you recognize your own type, which is an interesting moment. Like,
and the alchemical agent to transmute it to the positive aspect of it is said to be mindfulness. You recognize it, you see it without immersing in it, without identifying with it. You understand its nature, and it transitions to its purified form.
Well, that's an interesting topic, because the awareness is obviously clearly in mindfulness awareness. You're just training to see it without tracking it, without being pulled into the rabbit hole with it, without repressing it. And that is a really powerful thing. I've had that thought lately meditating. It's just, this is all fabrication. There's not one thing that is other than a mental event here that I'm experiencing at the moment, unless the light shifts in the room, and that's still a mental event from that point of view. Mm-hmm. So but does awareness or mindfulness dislodge the deeply entangled psychophysical manifestation of that particular klesha or habit?
Well, they say yes, because it transforms like the greedy type, that tendency. And again, it doesn't mean you're a greedy person.
Right.
It's just a mode of perception. It transmutes to what they call faith, which they mean a love of life, that movement toward experience. And, you're not shunning, you're not hiding, you're really moving toward experience with grasping. That changes to faith. It's like a love of life. It's a real appreciation for experience.
So let me go there with you for a second, because that's similar to like a Dzogchen kind of view, which is you throw the snake up at the air and it uncoils. The awareness liberates everything.
Yeah.
But in the more graduated paths, I would say there's the notion of awareness, and then there's a second notion called purification, where there's some process of cleaning it up. And cleaning the baked on stuff at the bottom of the pan, like prostrations or something like that, where you really are putting some elbow grease into not just being aware of it, but actually changing the pattern.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's closest to the mindfulness will do the work, but it's probably not that easy to be mindful of such deeply entrenched processes. I mean, that's part of my teaching of loving kindness and emphasis on loving kindness, is that when we say mindfulness, and it has different meanings in different traditions, but it's a pretty intricate meaning in Theravada, because it has that non-judgmental factor where you're not blaming yourself for what you're experiencing. You're also not caught up in it, and it's not that easy not to blame yourself, right? Not to add shame and dislike and disgust and all these things as we see these patterns. And that's where another practice like loving kindness practice will actually enable you to genuinely be mindful and not just kind of look at what's going on and kind of hating it at the same time.
But Sharon, isn't there a second step in metta, the way you teach it, which is you're aware of the habit maybe coming up, but you also like twist it and substitute maybe safe. You
sure.
You iterate
that's why
faith.
It's a complementary practice. So what I'm saying is this could be these other practices I think would be seen as building blocks toward actually being able to be mindful.
Oh.
Wow. Which is like if you use Ram Dass's phrase, loving awareness instead of mindfulness,
right? Where's
the loving part going to come from? You could say it's inherent in the awareness, which is true, but it's not that easy to get there, So maybe you do 50 other practices to actually enable you to be mindful.
Yeah. So the mindfulness in that system is like the supreme experience in a way. It's like, is it... if you were like totally mindful, is that like equivalent to samadhi in some sense, or where does it go to in terms of like what kind of state of mind is being engendered there?
I wouldn't say samadhi because they also make a distinction between just pure concentration, which would be samadhi, and insight generating practices, which is the mindfulness,
which is where the vipassana comes in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But well, actually, just to finish the system, the aversive tendency transmutes to this kind of penetrating intelligence because it's got that cutting through quality, but it's usually laden with all that burning and judgment and things of aversion. But here we can just slice through. And the deluded type, there's even hope for the deluded type, transmutes to kind of equanimity because it's very balanced. Right. It's not super reactive to begin with, but it's kind of everything's sort of blurred, and then when you strengthen awareness, you can have a clear perception along with the equanimity, along with the balance.
When I like, as building business structures, I enjoy that aspect of life and community and kind of, I'm intrigued by the possibility of taking this stuff out of the barn and putting it out into the field. So I use this every day in everyday life. The most common situation is like getting a meeting together. We just had a team meeting at Dharma Moon, and there's a person there who we would describe as Vajra, which is the aggressive tendency, but the clarity is the flip side of it. And you just can almost play with the energy of a group in that way by putting people together in different configurations. And some people are going to be more allergic to each other. Like, for example, a Vajra person, or like what was the term used? Aggressive or aggressive? Aversive. Yeah. An aversive person and a deluded person. If you made them do a retreat together or get married,
well, they often do, right?
They're going to go like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's 5 in the Vajrayana tradition. You said there were 4, didn't you, at one point?
There are 3.
3.
It was grasping, aversive, deluded, and then the purified form.
Okay, so that's just like the 3 root kleshas, right?
Yeah.
But was there a 4th thing, or maybe I made that up? No. You work with those 3.
I think it is because you're a grasping type, self-confessed.
I want 4.
You wanted more. You wanted even more.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the 2 others in the Vajrayana tradition, what you're talking about would basically be passion, aggression, ignorance. Those would be the 3 in different wording for it. But then there would be jealousy and pride.
Right.
And they're really like, if you're into color, like RGB for a television set, they're really blending. Like you could say that jealousy is aggression mixed with desire.
Yeah.
Right. So you can start like playing with multiple sets. So once you see your own situation, what's your job? What's your job?
Well, I like the system. I think it's a tremendous amount of fun because, first of all, it depersonalizes.
Right.
everything is like saying, I'm a Leo. Therefore,
Right.
I've got these traits. Although Bob Thurman always told me I was very bad Leo, which I suppose I am compared to him, but
Well, good, bad, happy, and sad. All thoughts vanish into emptiness like the imprint of a bird in the sky.
right. But it's sort of like, instead of saying
you're Leo, when's your birthday?
August 5th.
Oh God, I know so much Leo.
And
my whole relational life is in the
Bob's
summer.
Is August 3rd.
Oh my God. Oh my goodness. So why are you a bad Leo? Because you don't.
That's right.
Because you pull back a little bit.
Well, yeah, exactly. I told him a story about being at a fundraiser for Barack Obama and kind of moving back to let someone else be in front of me. Mm-hmm. I was telling the story in front of the whole group at Menla, and Bob booms out, "What kind of Leo are you?" So okay.
Well, Leo can also recess, right? You could have the same quality, but you pulled inward, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But I love the kind of impersonality of it. Like we had dinner the other night with a colleague, Joseph, who's a self-confessed greedy or grasping type, and me and this person who's a self-confessed aversive type. And all these things came up, and she was just like that. Now, is that going to work? We laughed, and she said she told somebody in some group she's in, just give me a minute. My first reaction is going to be no. Just like, give me a minute. So it's a way of knowing yourself a little better without judging yourself so harshly, which is great.
And other people too, right?
And other people too. It's just tendencies, it's conditioning.
Right.
And realizing that I'm really fascinated by those purified forms, how the very same tendency can be seen through our personal work and manifested very differently, which almost brings me back to our first topic, which is, do you think, does it matter what is motivating you in doing the work of engagement? It might matter in terms of a personal cost, because outrage might just burn you out. Perpetual, chronic, overwhelming outrage over a period of time. It also might, and it's like the lab of our own experience of really being overwhelmed by anger, not just feeling it and recognizing it, but really being overwhelmed by it. Like what happens, like the exercise I usually propose to people is like, bring up a memory of a time you were really, really angry at yourself. Just like bring it up and feel it, feel what happens. Is that also a time where you remember the 5 great things you did that same morning? You said that stupid thing? No. Right? There's a lot of information that's lost in like the blaze of anger, that maybe we lose options. Maybe we lose a sense of creative solutions. And so again, I'm not talking about not feeling what we're feeling or not honoring what we're feeling, but when we're overwhelmed by certain feelings as our perpetual motivation, there's, I think, a cost.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people, to not have that sense of a great divide between the two ways of being, do use contemplative practice for kind of, you could say, almost refining their motivation in their engagement. And it'd be interesting to see, does that really help sustain an effort?
Well, we're talking about sustaining. Sustaining is if you're operating in a way that is not draining energy by extra effort, like isometric effort, pushing against yourself, your own obstacle. There is a kind of perpetual Buddha motion machine that is part of our makeup, where you do not get tired by being compassionate. You do not get tired by engaging people. You don't get tired about being aware. But fatigue, they talk about compassion fatigue. Have you ever heard that expression?
I have. And, researchers and people around the Dalai Lama don't really like the term compassion fatigue. They like empathy fatigue.
What's the difference?
Well, in the Theravada, compassion, sometimes it has a two-part definition. So the first part is like empathy. It's like the trembling or the quivering of the heart in response to seeing pain or suffering. So it's like a movement of the heart. The second part, it's a movement toward to see if you can be of help. And that's the compassion part. But so empathy is, and neuroscientists say this too, empathy is different than compassion. It's like different parts of the brain. Because we might feel the empathy, we might feel that kind of resonance with someone's, tough situation, but we might be frightened by it. We might want to run away, or we might be so exhausted to begin with.
Okay, so it's a two-part thing. One is you feel it, the other is you act on it.
That's right. And so they're saying, and I've seen research that shows like if you have a lot of empathy, but you over-identify with the people or the person, then empathy doesn't lead to compassion, it leads to empathic distress.
And is that a science definition or
Yeah.
Okay,
This is all psychological research,
empathetic distress?
Empathic or empathetic distress. Yeah.
That's a chapter in the book. I guess there's somebody who's really talked about that.
Yeah. Somebody sent me their research paper because it's Tanya Singer in her lab is the first person I knew that identified different brain regions for empathy and compassion. She had like Matthew Ricard, in a fMRI machine, and she's in Germany. And when he was just resonating, there would be some distressing signal in his brain. But when he was actively doing compassion, it was not there. It was not a painful state. And then
so compassion is the relief for empathy,
right.
Empathetic distress, right? Empathic distress. It actually takes that energy outward and balances the force.
But the common term is compassion fatigue. That's what everyone means.
This is really what I love about your ability to articulate something like that. That is like so illuminating. If you think about that, making that distinction, not everybody can. There are people who know it, but they couldn't make it so accessible, available to somebody who's just out there in the field trying to get through a day,
Yeah, and I really empathize, with those people and their point of view. I just like when I got to interview these people for Real Change, and I talked to people like very involved in one movement or another, and there were a couple of things that were really interesting. One was a woman who was not meditator per se, but had some really amazing values, who was very strong in the striking fast food workers movement. When people working in fast food restaurants were striking for, I think it was $15 an hour minimum wage and or the right to unionize. And they would say, everybody in my family and, people I knew were saying, don't rock the boat. Don't make a mess. You've got almost nothing right now and you can have really nothing if you lose your job. And she said, but I had, as my self-respect grew, I couldn't allow myself to be treated that way. And as I looked at younger people, I thought I can't allow this system just to grind them up, So that's where the strength to actually lead a movement was coming from. So that was really fascinating.
Well, and that isn't that also kind of the more quote unquote wrathful aspect of compassion?
Yeah.
The interruptive part where it's not just giving that person $2 on the street. It's actually telling somebody, stop. You become a and that is a real art form to do that without aggression, isn't it?
It's a real art form. And that's in a way where we also need community.
Right.
And
it's hard to do alone.
It's hard to do alone. It's very hard to do alone.
Yeah, wow.
But, I understand like people's complaint. But then, I do think back to the time of the Buddha, and I think it was a lot more engaged than, they're not hermits. They're going out every day for food, and as you know, you go into a monastic society. It's a society, It's
That's
like,
right. Yeah. It's like I went with Daniel Aiken to Sikkim to see, his teacher, Garwan Rinpoche monastery, and we did 10 days of like all these ritual empowerments. But meanwhile, buses are arriving in the middle of this thing, and kids from the local schools are coming up. And while he's doing the empowerment, he's giving blessings to the kids. And it is a society that is different than our society, and it's why we have to think about what's going to be our way of creating a social fabric that holds these ideas. It was unbelievable. And you also saw, the profound instruction of transmission, the relentless energy that he had. There was no fatigue of even at a physical level. So he is kind of like, his wind horse is really flying. And all these people are coming from different, and he's, passing things off to the different Rinpoches to pass through and stuff. So a cohesive culture that includes the social fabric, and people would come to him and ask him about a supermarket in town. Like, we're having trouble with our business. So it's as you said earlier, it's kind of one fabric. If you look deeper. We got a mess on our hands here, though, don't we?
Aye.
That's a mantra, isn't it?
That is my mantra. Aye.
Yeah.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Is there any silver lining? I mean, if you're somebody who tends to like look for the transmutation aspect in things, or are we just like going down the sewer together on all this stuff?
I don't know. I have a positive view about human potential,
which we would call basic goodness if you're using the Shambhala reference point. Okay,
so I have a positive view about that. I don't know in terms of historical currents. And empires fall. Things do happen, but I do have this kind of belief in possibility and in human goodness as a potential. And I think what I hope happens is a big reach, but I think for all of us, we have to really understand the consequences of our actions a little better. Mm-hmm. That when we are generating hatred into this world, it's not going to make us stronger. It's going to make us more isolated and freaked out all the time, because everyone becomes an enemy. And for people to really see, my habit of objectifying certain kinds of people or doing this or doing that is only having me live in fear. It's not that pumped up life. I kind of thought it was going to be whatever, and it's not easy for people to see the consequences of their actions for any of us.
Well, that's misplaced faith, as you were talking about before.
Yeah, exactly.
If I just generate enough wind here and storm energy, somehow that will fix the thing. Yeah. I don't need precision. I don't need clarity. I don't need patience. I don't need non-aggression. I don't,
Right.
But it's deep because it does aggression. It's funny, in the paramitas, the obstacle to patience is aggression. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's the very thing that generates aggression is when you lose your patience, you move into a field of aggression and pushing. Yeah. And I'm seeing so much of that. It's kind of, I'm doing my best as a kind of leader of an organization and a tribe of people that are gathering. How can we even deal with each other at a certain level?
Yeah.
And this topic has come up, in some of these retreats that you and I do. Backstage, the teachers are coming together and saying, "What are we going to do about all this? How are we going to approach this?" So, you've been hearing that, right? That kind of conversation.
I've been hearing that a lot.
Like maybe at a retreat, people want to talk about what's happening in the world.
Maybe they do, and often they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like, for once, I need a break,
Yeah.
Somebody just gave me this great quotation from Prentice Hemphill, who said something like, "A strong boundary is the place where I can love both you and me."
Wow. Well, you're the best. You're the maestro at those kind of things. Like, you can put somebody out of your life, but don't put them out of your.
Don't put them out of your heart. Yeah.
Right. You made that up, right?
That was Sylvia Boorstein,
Oh,
actually.
Sylvia did that? Okay.
Give credit where credit is due. Well, Neem Karoli Baba, of course, said the first part, never put anyone out of your heart, never throw anyone out of your heart. And Sylvia heard that, and she said, you might throw them out of your life, but never throw them out of your heart.
She added a little spin on it as it went out.
Which is reality, right?
Well, so many of these greatest teachers somehow land on that square, like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche said to one of our students, "I'm going to give you my highest teaching now." And, he made him come up, ear whispered, and kind of whispered in his ear, and he said, "Be kind to everyone." And you just, and we both love Maharaji, with Krishnadas and our friends there, and that whole, gathering of people. And the famous thing of love everybody and tell the truth. See, I like that even more than love everybody.
Yeah.
Because that gives it like a little prajna edge to it, a little sword energy to it. And I think about that every day, that one.
Well, especially because he said that to Ramdas, who was really furious at the time, and a lot of people.
Yeah.
So what's the truth? There's a deeper truth than his anger, maybe.
And that's what you were talking about in your workshop, is what is the deeper truth from anger is clarity? What?
It's penetrating intelligence. You could say clarity.
Or prajna?
Yeah.
And prajna just burns clean, right? It doesn't trash the joint. On the way through. Destroys that which needs to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Sharon, we have a certain amount of time on this earth, right?
Yeah.
Do you think about like what you want to accomplish? You have that kind of thought? Like, is there something on your Dharma bucket list?
Yes and no. I mean, the Insight Meditation Society, which I helped co-found, is turning 50 next year.
Like Saturday Night Live.
Right, like Saturday Night Live. I don't think we'll be as funny in our party, but we are going to have an online party February 14th, which is the day we moved in almost 50 years ago.
Valentine's Day. How perfect.
Valentine's Day. Yeah, it's perfect because we could always remember it. So in a way, that is the legacy, that has served. I mean, our mantra the first year, because remember, I was 23 years old. We were children. Jack and Joseph were not that much older than I. And our mantra for the first year is we can always close in a year. If no one in this country wants to learn how to meditate or learn this form of meditation, we can just close in a year. And which didn't really please the people. We couldn't get a mortgage, so all these three people had to go to the bank. They didn't have to. They chose to go to the bank and get personal loans to total $50,000 so we could actually open the door. So they weren't really happy to hear us say, we can just close in a year. But we didn't know. When I think about what has happened in these these last 49, 50 years for the Dharma in this country, in the West altogether, it's amazing. And
Insight has been an absolute through line for all of it.
Yeah.
And it's still one of the best places to do retreats and to learn.
Yeah.
And I'm teaching there on Sunday in New York. I mean, it's like, how have you kept it together for 50 years? That's kind of amazing.
Yes, it is amazing.
So you were saying the bucket list is to keep it going or to make sure?
I'd say, in the beginning of the pandemic, my mantra was, I just want to make it to 50 years. I just want to make it to 50, because who knew? We had to close like everyone else. And, and now it's reopened. They're talking about building another center across the street because it's still really robust. But I say I do want to write a book on this is a real first disclosure on suffering and the end of suffering.
Wow.
And I sent just a couple of paragraphs to my agent. I think she found it way too depressing. And I realized it is kind of depressing unless you really fill it out, And I realized, I have to write
Wait a minute. It says suffering and the end of suffering?
I know, but the end of suffering seems a little abstract if it's not.
Wow. I heard it a whole different way.
Yeah, well, good.
Like fireworks.
I have my first reader
going on. Fireworks going off.
So I said, I don't think she'll hear this podcast, but and I really love her. But so I realized I need to fill it out. I need to create a proposal because I actually don't have a publisher, and sort of live in that terrain for a little while so I can actually write a proposal. And I that feels like it will fulfill something in me,
Yeah, it's like it's words that are caught in your mind and want to come out. And if you boil it down to a pith instruction, like a blurb for the book, what would it say?
Well, part of it is based on this. I did a bunch of programs pre-election with Ai-jen Poo, who's a labor leader in the domestic worker field and an activist, and she said, quoting a sociologist whose name I have written down but I don't have on the top of my head, that there are two kinds of suffering in the world. One is it's just what happens. Somebody dies, you have an injury, you have a loss. And of course, from the Buddhist point of view, how we relate to that makes a huge difference. And the second kind of suffering is a choice. It's policy. It's ways we treat one another. It's decisions that we make. And again, from the Buddhist point of view, if we saw interconnection, for example, rather than isolation and conflict all the time, we would make different policy. We would have.
If there's an elevator pitch for the book, let's hear it.
Oh God, I'm not there yet.
Okay.
There's an end to suffering.
Well, and when you say that, it's right there in the Four Noble Truths, first utterance. Because I love talking about the Four Noble Truths. Because if you didn't get it the first time, you're going to come back. But that was it. And the end of suffering is kind of, then you have to define your terms and things like that. But when you think of that, I think of and don't take this the wrong way, but like Christians, when they're born again, it's the end of, they have had a rebirth into a system that is not defined by suffering. It's defined by joy. I mean, I don't want to make too close a parallel to it, but and the Buddhist approach is that you better be careful about misplaced faith. It's got more of that edge to it than many other traditions. But wait a minute, there's that misplaced faith or blind faith. But the same location is that the suffering, the constant gnawing of a toothache, of a headache, a migraine. It's like it ceases. And you want to leave that footprint in the rock on your way out. Is that the deal?
I think so. It's rare that I or you, I'm sure, get that kind of feeling. There's something I really need to say. I need to write. That's different. That's not just repeating what. I'm
so for it. It smells like a peach. It smells like ripe mango. It smells juicy, delicious, and like you could just say whatever you want about it.
Yeah, I can't wait to interview you. Now I'm excited.
And thank you for sharing it. For Sharoning it.
Thank you.
Because in each of us, I feel is embedded, a real important part of feeling the arc of our life properly. And for us, our gang, we're getting to the point where it is 50 years later. We did contribute to a certain evolution. So you have earned the right to kind of like make your pitch for whatever it is that you truly believe in. That morning.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of a beautiful moment to pause at. And I just want to add that, are we able to talk about the children's situation?
Yes. Yeah, of course.
Okay, because I think that comes right out of this, because it's for the next 2 or 3 generations down. But could you share what you're planning to do there?
Yes. So through Shambhala Publications, which published my first book, Loving Kindness, there's a children's book coming out, which I, in effect, co-authored. They had a children's book writer, which was a great thing, it's coming out December 9th. It's called Kind Carl.
Wow, Kind Carl.
Kind Carl everything's got a K. Kind Carl. Let me read you the subtitle. A little crocodile with big feelings.
Oh.
So it's about Carl, who has a terrible temper, lives in Orlando, and learns loving kindness meditation and becomes the sweetest thing. It was so great working with the illustrator or communicating with the illustrator through Shambhala. And, they would send me these illustrations, and I'd say, I'm not sure Carl looks kind of sweet enough after doing loving kindness. Can we make him a little nicer looking? And then, in the back, there's loving kindness meditation for kids. There's like a gratitude activity and sympathetic joy activity. And there's Carl. I'm looking at it now. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May you be safe. May you be healthy. And this is Carl's meditating with his little crocodile face.
Wow, this is going to be such a cool thing because, grown-ups are kids in disguise, right?
Right.
Not that well disguised sometimes. Congratulations on that. And, I mentioned earlier that we have started Strawberry Moons Media, which is going to have a For Kids channel on YouTube. And we'll definitely figure out something that we can do together with that. That's to be able to get kids ripening on the vine, with some of these very simple ideas. In our case, the idea of mindfulness is being sort of transmitted through these penguins.
Nice.
Ruby, and it does belly breathing, and there's a storm cloud that passes. So these are all, if you can plant seeds in children, that's a real art form. And the seeds that's being planted is this, blah, 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 so the counterpoint is really going to be important. So congratulations on the book. I'm going to really look forward to it, helping you any way I can with it. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. I'm so happy.
Yeah. So maybe mention again your program coming up, and we'll put it in the
tricycle.
Yeah.
It's an online course on the 3 personality types: grasping, aversive, and deluded, and their purified forms. And it's coming out through Tricycle Magazine in the summer.
Okay, so we'll have a link, everybody, for you to join that program, and you should join it. If you haven't experienced Sharon as a teacher, it's an honor for me to recommend that you do so, and because the clarity and mixed with this sort of obvious warmth and so forth is something that you should experience, and not just in a quick way like this. Give her a seat to hold with you for a while, and go do that. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about that. And great to see you, Sharon. It's really enjoyed the chat, and hopefully we talk soon.
Great, thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right, everybody, that was the episode. Thank you so much for listening all the way through until the end. We also want to offer a deep bow of gratitude for Sharon in bringing her wisdom onto this platform. Finally, we'd love to thank the folks over at the Be Here Now Network for helping us produce this podcast and ensuring that it reaches the ears of those who need it the most. If you want to stay plugged in with Sharon's work, head on over to SharonSalzberg.com. Again, she's got many books, she's got some events, she's got a podcast that is also very worth your time. If you want to stay plugged in with what David has going on, head on over to dharmamoon.com. Once again, we do have a new mindfulness meditation teacher training beginning on June 13th. You can also just join the first weekend if you want to get a little bit of a taste of what it is that we're doing there. There's other events that are happening through that platform as well. So please come join us in one of these classes. I'd love to see you. It'd be a great time. Lastly, but also important, if you enjoy this show, please consider leaving us a review, liking, subscribing, and sharing this so that your friends and family can have access to these powerful and important conversations. That's going to be it for today. Thank you once again for joining us. I'm Brett, and that was episode 56 of Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck.